In a world where silence often speaks louder than words, there are connections that go beyond what we can see or explain. Today, we're going to explore one of those rare, powerful bonds. This is the story of a boy and his wolf. But this isn't just any story about a pet or a wild animal. This is about something deeper, something that words could never fully capture. The boy, a quiet soul, lived on the edge of a small village, nestled between dense forests and towering mountains. He wasn't like the other kids, never quite fitting in. While they played and laughed, he found comfort in solitude. His refuge was the forest. It was there, in the stillness of the trees and the whisper of the wind, that he felt at home. But even in the calm of nature, there was something missing until the day he met the wolf. It happened unexpectedly, as most life-changing moments do. On a cold, misty evening, when the sun was barely a fading glow on the horizon, the boy wandered deeper into the woods than he ever had before. Something drew him in an almost magnetic pull that he couldn't explain. And then, from the shadows, the wolf appeared. At first, the boy froze. His heart raced, and he could feel every pulse in his body. But the wolf didn't snarl or growl. It just stood there, watching him with piercing yellow eyes. For what felt like minutes, they simply stared at each other, neither moving. It was as if time had stopped. There was no fear, no aggression, just a silent understanding. The boy slowly extended his hand, not really knowing why. He didn't expect the wolf to come closer, but it did. Cautiously, the wolf took a step, then another, until it was right in front of him. They were face to face now, and in that moment, something passed between them. It wasn't words or even a gesture. It was something far more profound. From that day on, they were inseparable. The boy and the wolf formed a bond that no one else could understand. They moved through the forest together as if they were one. The boy didn't need to speak. The wolf seemed to understand him instinctively. It was like they had their own secret language, one built on trust and intuition. Together, they navigated the wilderness, exploring places that had been untouched by human hands. But this bond wasn't without its challenges. The village didn't take kindly to the idea of a wild wolf being so close to their homes. They whispered behind the boy's back, spreading rumors and stoking fear. Wolves are dangerous, they said. They can't be trusted. Yet the boy knew what they didn't. This wolf wasn't just any animal, it was his friend, his protector. Still, the tension between the boy's life with the wolf and the villagers' growing unease was beginning to mount. As the days went by, strange things began to happen in the village. Livestock started disappearing, and people reported seeing shadows in the woods at night. Naturally, suspicion fell on the wolf. The villagers grew more restless, demanding that something be done. But the boy refused to believe that his wolf was behind the disappearances. He could feel it in his gut. There was something else out there, something darker. One evening, as the boy sat by the fire in his small wooden cabin, he felt the wolf's presence beside him. Its eyes, usually calm and steady, seemed restless, as if it knew something was coming. The air felt thick with anticipation. The boy's heart raced, not from fear, but from the uncertainty of what lay ahead. He looked at the wolf, its fur glowing in the flickering firelight, and realized that this bond they shared might be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. And that's where our story begins. What's lurking in the shadows of the forest? What challenges will the boy and his wolf face as the pressure from the village grows? Will their unspoken bond be enough to overcome the dangers that await them? Stay tuned, because this is only the beginning. The secret language between a boy and his wolf is about to be put to the ultimate test, and the outcome will leave you on the edge of your seat. The night outside the boy's cabin felt heavier than usual, the kind of weight that makes the air difficult to breathe. The moon hung low, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the forest floor. The boy sat by the fire, his mind restless. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would change everything. The wolf lay beside him, its head resting on its paws, but its ears were perked up, listening. Every now and then, it would lift its head, sniffing the air, its golden eyes darting toward the window, as if it could sense what the boy couldn't. They had shared countless nights like this, sitting in silence, communicating through glances and gestures. But tonight was different. There was an unease in the air, and it wasn't just the tension from the village. It was something deeper, something darker. The boy thought back to when he first met the wolf. It had been a chance encounter, or at least that's what he used to believe. Now, he wasn't so sure. Over the months, as their bond grew, he began to feel that their meeting had been more than just fate, it had been necessary. The wolf wasn't just an animal. It was like a part of him he hadn't known was missing. Together, they had become a team, each understanding the other in ways no one else could. But now the village was on edge. The missing livestock had been the first sign, but then strange sounds began to echo through the woods at night. Low growls, rustling leaves, footsteps that seemed to vanish as soon as someone went to investigate. People whispered of something unnatural lurking in the forest, something more dangerous than a lone wolf. And yet, the villagers' fear turned to blame, and that blame fell squarely on the boy's wolf. The village elder, a man with sharp features and a voice that could silence a room, had already warned the boy once. "Wolves don't belong near people," he had said, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "If your wolf is the cause of this trouble, there will be consequences." The boy didn't argue. There was no point. He knew the villagers wouldn't understand the bond he shared with the wolf, and they certainly wouldn't believe that his wolf wasn't the one responsible for the missing animals. Still, the boy couldn't help but wonder. He knew his wolf better than anyone, but what if there was something out there, another wolf, perhaps that was stirring up trouble? The forest was vast, filled with secrets and creatures that had learned to hide in plain sight. What if something had followed them back that night when they first met? As the fire crackled softly, the boy's mind wandered deeper into the past, back to the days before he had met the wolf. He had always been drawn to the forest, to the quiet places where he could escape the noise of the village. Even as a child, he had been different, more at home among the trees than with other kids his age. His mother used to worry, always telling him to be careful when he ventured too far. "The forest has its own rules," she would say. It's not like the village. But the boy had never been afraid of the forest. In fact, it was the one place he felt truly free. His father, on the other hand, had been a different story. A hunter by trade, he had always taught the boy to be cautious, to never trust anything in the wild. "Survival comes first," he would say, his voice rough with experience. But the boy never wanted to hunt, never wanted to see the forest as a place of danger. And after his father disappeared one winter, lost to the wilderness during a hunting trip, the boy's bond with the forest only grew stronger. It became a place of peace, a place where he could remember his father without the bitterness of loss. Now, with his wolf beside him, the boy felt that same sense of belonging whenever they walked through the woods. But something had shifted. The forest wasn't just a refuge anymore. It had become a place of mystery, full of whispers and shadows that seemed to follow them wherever they went. The boy knew the wolf sensed it too. Every time they ventured out lately, the wolf's posture was tense, its movements cautious, as if it were on the lookout for something unseen. The boy rose from his spot by the fire and moved to the window. Outside, the moonlight painted the world in shades of silver and black. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their branches creaking like old bones. He couldn't see anything unusual, but he knew better than to trust appearances. The forest had a way of hiding its secrets until it was too late. The wolf padded over to him, pressing its head against his leg. The boy absently scratched behind its ears, feeling the warmth of its fur beneath his fingers. They stood like that for a long moment, both staring out into the night, both waiting for something they couldn't name. And then, in the distance, the boy heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a low growl carried on the wind. His breath caught in his throat. The wolf stiffened beside him, its muscles tensing as its ears flicked toward the sound. It was far away, but unmistakable. There was something out there, something watching them. The boy's heart raced as he strained to listen, but the sound was gone as quickly as it had come, swallowed by the night. He glanced down at the wolf, whose eyes were now locked on the darkness beyond the cabin. The boy didn't need to speak. He knew the wolf had heard it too. They were no longer alone in the forest. The boy turned away from the window and quickly threw a log onto the fire. The flames roared to life, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. He knew they couldn't stay here forever. Whatever was out there wasn't going to go away on its own. He had to find out what or who was behind the strange happenings in the village. And the wolf was the only one he could trust to help him. But the boy also knew that leaving the cabin in the dead of night wasn't an option. Not yet. The village was already suspicious of him and his wolf. If they saw him roaming the woods at this hour, they'd assume the worst. They'd blame him for everything, and they'd come for his wolf. He couldn't let that happen. For now, all he could do was wait. Wait and watch. The wolf lay back down by the fire, its eyes never leaving the door, as if it, too, knew that something was coming. The boy sat beside it, resting his hand on its thick fur, drawing comfort from the steady rise and fall of its breathing. Outside, the forest was silent, but the boy knew better than to be fooled by the quiet. There were eyes in the dark, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, he would be ready, he and his wolf, together. The night dragged on, heavy with tension. The boy and his wolf sat in silence, the fire crackling softly as the flames began to die down. Every so often, the wolf would lift its head, ears twitching at some distant sound that was too faint for the boy to hear. He could feel his heart beating in his chest, the anxiety building with each passing minute. Something was out there, and it was getting closer. Then, without warning, the wolf shot to its feet, growling low and deep. The boy jumped up, his pulse quickening. The growl wasn't aimed at the door, but toward the window. He rushed to the window, peering out into the dark. At first, he saw nothing, just the same shadows of the trees swaying in the wind. But then, just at the edge of the clearing, he saw a shape large and moving silently between the trees. The wolf's growl grew louder, more insistent. The boy's breath caught in his throat. Whatever was out there, it wasn't alone. He could make out other shapes now, shadowy figures moving in unison, circling the cabin. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to lose his head, not now. He grabbed the small knife his father had left behind, knowing it was a weak defense against whatever was out there, but it was all he had. The wolf moved to his side, its fur bristling, teeth bared. They stood together, waiting for the inevitable. And then, a howl pierced the night, a long, mournful sound that sent a chill down the boy's spine. It wasn't the wolf beside him. This was something else, something wilder, more dangerous. The boy had heard wolf howls before, but this was different. It carried with it a sense of purpose, of intent. The other shadows stopped moving, as if waiting for something. And then, slowly, they emerged from the trees. The boy's eyes widened as he realized what he was seeing. Wolves large, wild and unmistakably dangerous. There were at least 5 of them, maybe more, their eyes glowing in the moonlight as they stalked toward the cabin. The boy's wolf let out a snarl, stepping in front of him protectively. For a moment, the wolves hesitated, their eyes fixed on the wolf standing between them and the boy. But then the largest of the pack, a massive black wolf with scars across its face, stepped forward, its eyes locked on the boy's wolf, and in that moment, the boy understood. This wasn't just any wolf pack. This was the wolf's past, coming back to claim it. The boy's heart sank. He had always known that his wolf was different, that it had once belonged to the wild. But he hadn't expected the wolf's old pack to come looking for it. The black wolf let out a low growl, and the other wolves followed its lead, inching closer. The boy's wolf stood its ground, but the tension in the air was thick, and the boy knew a fight was inevitable. He glanced down at the knife in his hand, feeling helpless. There was no way he could fend off a pack of wild wolves, not on his own. But just as the pack began to close in, something shifted. The boy's wolf let out a sharp bark, one that seemed to echo through the clearing. The black wolf froze, its eyes narrowing. The boy didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel the shift in the air. The pack had stopped moving, their eyes now locked on the boy's wolf, waiting. The boy's wolf took a step forward, its head held high, eyes fierce. It barked again, louder this time, and the pack responded with a series of low whines. The boy could hardly believe what he was seeing. His wolf wasn't just defending him, it was commanding them. Slowly, the pack began to back away, their heads lowered in submission. Even the black wolf, though clearly reluctant, took a step back. For a moment, the boy thought it was over, that the pack would leave them in peace. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. One of the smaller wolves, lurking in the shadows, broke away from the pack and charged. The boy barely had time to react. He raised the knife, but before he could strike, the wolf lunged at him only to be intercepted by his wolf in a blur of fur and teeth. The two wolves crashed to the ground, snarling and snapping at each other. The boy stumbled back, watching in horror as his wolf fought off the attacker. It was a brutal, vicious fight, but in the end, his wolf emerged victorious, standing over the defeated wolf with blood on its muzzle. The pack, now clearly shaken, retreated further into the woods, leaving the boy and his wolf alone. The boy dropped to his knees, relief flooding over him. His wolf limped toward him, its side heaving with exhaustion, but there was a fierce pride in its eyes. The boy reached out, his hand trembling, and rested it on the wolf's head. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. But even as the danger passed, the boy knew that something had changed. The wolf's pack had come for it, and though they had been driven away, the call of the wild was strong. The boy looked into his wolf's eyes, and for the first time, he saw the truth. The wolf had chosen to stay with him, to protect him, but it was still part of the wilderness. No matter how strong their bond was, it couldn't deny its true nature forever. And then, just when the boy thought the night's ordeal was over, a new sound reached his ears, soft footsteps, barely audible, approaching from the other side of the cabin. The boy's blood ran cold. He had been so focused on the wolves that he hadn't noticed. He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing in the doorway, cloaked in shadow, was the village elder. His eyes gleamed with a mix of triumph and something far more unsettling. "I knew it," he said, his voice low and sinister. "I knew there was something unnatural about that wolf of yours." The boy's breath caught in his throat. The elder had been watching, waiting for this moment. He wasn't just here to accuse the boy of harboring a dangerous animal he had known all along. But the boy realized with a sinking feeling that the elder hadn't come alone. From behind the elder, more figures emerged, villagers, armed with torches and weapons. The boy's heart raced. He had just fought off a pack of wolves, but now he was faced with a new enemy, one far more dangerous because it was human. The villagers had come to take his wolf, and the boy knew that they wouldn't listen to reason. But as the elder stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with malice, the wolf growled, standing protectively in front of the boy once more. The elder sneered. "You think you can protect that creature? You've seen what it is. It's wild. It doesn't belong here." The boy clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had to do something. He couldn't let them take the wolf. But before he could speak, the wolf stepped forward, baring its teeth at the elder, and the villagers hesitated, unsure of what to do. And then, in a twist the boy could never have expected, the wolf turned its gaze to the boy, and for the first time, It didn't seem like an animal. There was a sadness in its eyes, a farewell. Slowly, the wolf lowered its head and backed away into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. The boy wanted to call out, to stop it, but he knew. The wolf had made its choice. It had protected him one last time, but now it was returning to where it truly belonged. The villagers, confused and unsure of what they had just witnessed, began to lower their weapons. The elder, still fuming, could do nothing. The boy stood there, his heart heavy, watching the forest where his wolf had vanished, knowing that their bond, though unbroken, had reached its end. And in the quiet that followed, the boy realized that sometimes the strongest connections are the ones that can never be fully understood or explained. The wolf had saved him, and in return, he had given it the freedom it deserved. But deep in his heart, the boy knew that somewhere out there, in the vast wilderness, his wolf would always be watching over him, just as he would always be waiting for the day they might meet again. The forest was quiet after the wolf disappeared into the shadows, leaving the boy standing alone in front of the villagers. The torches they held cast long, flickering shadows, but the tension in the air had finally broken. Without the wolf to fight against, the villagers seemed lost, unsure of what to do next. Some of them shuffled awkwardly, lowering their weapons, while others exchanged nervous glances, as if wondering why they had even come in the first place. The boy's chest felt heavy, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. He had lost something more than just a companion. The wolf had been part of him, a link to the wildness he had always felt inside, but never quite understood. And now that connection was gone, leaving an emptiness he wasn't sure how to fill. The elder, who had been so full of certainty and malice just moments before, now stood silent, staring into the dark woods where the wolf had vanished. The smug triumph that had lit up his face had faded, replaced with something that almost looked like confusion. He opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it again, as if he didn't have the words to justify what had happened. Slowly, the villagers began to disperse. One by one, they turned away from the boy, muttering to themselves, their torches flickering as they made their way back to the village. There was no grand confrontation, no final accusations. It was as if the presence of the wolf had held their fear together, and now that it was gone, they no longer had a reason to stay. The boy stood in the clearing, watching them leave, his hands clenched at his sides. He could still feel the lingering warmth of the wolf's fur under his fingers, the memory of its weight beside him, as real as if it were still there. But now, the forest felt different, quieter, emptier, as if something vital had slipped away in the night. When the last villager disappeared into the distance, the boy turned back to his cabin. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting a soft, fading light on the walls. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and for the first time, the silence inside felt overwhelming. He could hear his own breathing, the quiet crackle of the fire, and the faint rustle of the wind outside. But there was no soft padding of paws, no steady presence beside him. He sat down by the fire, staring into the dying flames, his thoughts tangled and heavy. He had always known that the wolf was wild, that it didn't truly belong in the world of people. But that knowledge didn't make the loss any easier to bear. The bond they had shared had been unspoken, beyond words, and now that it was gone, the boy felt like a part of himself had been taken with it. As the hours passed, the boy's mind wandered back to the time before the wolf, before everything had changed. He remembered the long days spent alone in the forest, the quiet walks through the trees, and the feeling of peace that had come with being surrounded by nature. That was where he had always felt most at home, where he had always belonged. And maybe, in some way, the wolf had come into his life to remind him of that, to show him that the wildness he had always felt inside was real, and that it was okay to embrace it. The next morning, the boy woke to the sound of birds outside the cabin. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow on the floor. For a moment, he lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to push away the ache in his chest. But as he got up and stepped outside, he realized that something had shifted. The village, the forest, even the sky, it all looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The fear that had hung over everything like a dark cloud was gone. He walked through the village later that day, and though people glanced at him, no one said anything. There were no more suspicious looks, no more whispers behind his back. It was as if the wolf's disappearance had taken the village's fear with it. Even the elder, who had been so determined to turn the villagers against him, seemed to have lost his fire. The boy saw him sitting outside his house, staring off into the distance, his face drawn and tired. In the days that followed, life in the village slowly returned to normal. The livestock stopped disappearing, and the strange noises in the forest seemed to fade away. It was as if the presence of the wolf had unsettled something in the balance of things, and now that it was gone, the world was finding its way back to peace. The boy returned to his walks in the forest, though now they felt different. The places he had once explored with the wolf by his side now felt larger, more unknown. But with each passing day, the boy began to feel that same old connection to the forest creeping back into his heart. The trees, the rivers, the mountains, they were still there, still waiting for him. But the boy knew he would never forget the wolf. It had been more than just an animal. It had been a guide, a friend, a protector. And though their paths had diverged, he would always carry a piece of the wolf with him, its strength, its wildness, its untamed spirit. He had learned something important through their bond, something that no one else in the village could ever understand. The wolf had shown him that there was more to life than what people saw on the surface, that there were forces at work in the world that went beyond words or explanation. The boy began spending more and more time in the forest, not out of loneliness, but out of a newfound respect for the world around him. The villagers no longer questioned his long absences or his connection to the wild. They had seen what the boy had been willing to sacrifice, and in their own way, they respected him for it. Even the elder, once so harsh and unyielding, seemed to have softened,